What's going on, guys? It's Coach Gaglione here. It's another edition of the Powerlifting with People podcast. I got my boy John Petrizzo on the line. How you doing?
Good to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we're rolling now. We had some good catching up and some laughs before. But for those that don't know who you are, I know you wear many hats as well. Lifter, trainer, physical therapist, professor, all this thing. So in a nutshell, a little bit of who you are and what you got going on right now.
Sure. I am, like you said, I'm a professor. So my full-time job, I work at Adelphi University in Garden City, New York, and I'm a professor in their exercise science program. I've been there since 2013. I've been training people since 2006. I got my bachelor's degree in exercise science from Hofstra, and immediately after that, started working full-time as a trainer. Went on to NYIT, got my doctorate in physical therapy in 2012. So ever since then, I've been, continuing to train people, see patients. I've had the opportunity, obviously, to teach courses for students that are interested in this field. And, I've been a lifter my whole life, growing up playing sports and things like that. Played football in college and afterwards started getting into powerlifting. So I've done powerlifting competitions since 2012. That's pretty much it. That's my background.
Awesome. So in terms of like what you kind of do like with your teaching and stuff, um when people are kind of starting out, like as far as learning all this stuff, I know there's like a lot of like kind of back and forth people like, oh, do you need a degree or not? So like what, I guess,
Mhm.
what is your like kind of feeling on like what for the courses that you teach and like I guess the degrees that your students are working towards? I guess
Mhm.
what are some of like the benefits of going down like the collegiate route and actually getting an exercise science degree versus just getting a personal training certification and kind of being more self-taught and
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be successful either way, really. And I can tell you, my first job out of college was working at Equinox. I worked full time as a trainer there. And some of the most successful trainers in the gym, they were full time personal trainers, did very well for themselves, were, people that were self taught, that were, career changes. They were just kind of passionate about fitness and exercise and made the jump into doing that as their full-time job and did very well with it. For me, the reason that I decided to major in exercise science for myself was because I was going to college. I went to community college. I got a associate's degree in liberal arts. And then I'm thinking about, well, what do I want to do? Like, what am I interested in? And I saw this exercise science major, and without really knowing much about it, I said, you know what? This is what I'm interested in. I love to work out. I love sports. I want to know more about this. And that's why I pursued it. And for me, when I started training people, I did feel like my education helped prepare me. I took classes like anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and exercise physiology. And, you don't have to, I don't think you have to have a mastery of that stuff. And you certainly can teach a lot of it to yourself. I mean, the information is out there, but I do feel like having that academic background helped me feel more confident, when I first started working with people. But I really do think that it can work either way very well. And most of my students are interested in ultimately becoming physical therapists, so I think that they pursue exercise science because it's a major that is lends itself very well to graduate physical therapy coursework. But for students that are just interested in becoming a personal trainer, I think you certainly can do very well if you take the time to find the right educational resources and you can do it on your own.
cool. So there's like so many things I'd like to kind of pick your brain on, but so one of the things that kind of comes to mind, and like obviously you've been in this kind of this industry, this field, and also as an athlete for a long time. Same with myself. We're a little bit on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Mhm.
Whereas I was a teacher, I was master's in special education, more self-taught, that sort of thing. But I can certainly appreciate both, and I think that it is important to have like some background. And I think like and you can tell me if I'm on the right track or not. I think the degree is going to kind of give you that like that foundation, and then you
Mhm.
still need like the practical experience, you need the practical knowledge, which I think is good. Whereas I think like at least what we see oftentimes in the powerlifting space, you have a lot of you're seeing more and more people like start like coaching people or offering programs, and that's another thing where we could talk about. I think there's a lot of people say like I'm offering coaching, but it's really like programming, right?
Programming, right? Yeah,
Which I think that I wish that like that would be differentiated a little bit more. And then
sure.
on the flip side, like we were kind of joking a little bit about like you have these people that might be like the nerds of the bunch, and they have like they know all the anatomy and all the physics and the
Mhm.
optimal angles and all this stuff, and but they really can't communicate very effectively, or they haven't really done it themselves. I know there's like a lot
Right.
of stuff. This evidence-based kind of crowd is a whole new like term, and I think there's like pros and cons to it. And
Yeah.
this is more like in the bodybuilding world, but and I'm not sure if you like kind of look at this stuff now. It's like there's this kind of weird, I don't know if it's weird, but there's this like craze of like lengthen partials and only train the lengthened position of the muscle and
Yeah.
don't now we don't do full range anymore. And now it's like so people get like so the pendulum swings so like far to like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, and again, it's one of those things that is this a trend or whatever. So I guess like the first question would be like as far as people are kind of getting started, whether they be an athlete themselves,
Mhm.
whether they're looking to train people. Um, it just there's like so much more information, like, and there's a lot of like, so like, how do you like, I guess, filter through like, okay, this is like useful and this is like something I should pay attention to, or
Yeah.
it can be really confusing for someone to just, it's good because we have the information, but I think the hardest thing is filtering out like what's actually like, useful and even like even true,
Yeah, you know what? It's a great point, and just to touch on a couple of things that you said there. One, I think it's super important. Like anybody, like if you can have the academic preparation, and do well in classes like anatomy and kinesiology and physiology, but if you don't actually practice it yourself and do it and get into the gym, it doesn't matter because you're not going to be able to like effectively teach it. You know what I mean? And that's something that I stress to my students all the time is like, it's great if you're a good student and you can do well in these classes, but like if you're not getting in the gym and training yourself and like programming for yourself and figuring these things out and getting comfortable learning how to do these different movement patterns, like you're not going to be able to teach it very well to other people. So there's a huge like practical component that in academic settings we can only do so much with, you know what I mean? And at a certain point, like you have to take it upon yourself to like go and do this stuff. um and then to your other point about in today's world, we have so much access to information, which is very different from like when you and I started. And basically there were the magazines, there were some online resources, but it was like so much more limited than what it is now. And with social media and just you have these influencers and on Instagram and TikTok, and they just put this stuff out there. And um it is really hard for someone who's just getting started to not get confused or overwhelmed or, be able to trust the information that they're getting. And to your point about, sometimes I think we can get so focused on like the minute details, right? Like the stuff with the bodybuilding and, how do we optimize hypertrophy and, in these lengthened positions and time under tension. Well, it's like, I've always been a big proponent of like the basics, and if you go back and you look at what were people doing, 50, 60 years ago that got them really big and strong before they had all this information, they were basically doing basic movement patterns, compound loading, early forms of periodization and progressive overload. And, somehow they were still able to be super successful. You know what I mean? So it's great that we have this information, but I think for most people starting out, being less complex and a little bit more, taking a simplistic approach is better than like diving into, all of this, the stuff that's like currently popular on social media and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I kind of want to touch on. So I think number one, I think if someone's listening to like, and whether you're either an athlete or a coach, and I do think like I know there's some people that, and I don't know if you experience that, just like they just want to be told what to do, and like that's fine. But I
Sure.
think and understanding like who your client is or who you're coaching is important. But I think having like some background knowledge and understanding, and I think if you're a good coach, you should be able to explain and you should have those conversations. This is like why we're doing this, and then also have practical application. So I think that's like really important to have like kind of the best of both worlds.
I agree. One thing that I tell all my students is like, people are going to ask you like, why am I doing this? Why are you having me do this exercise? Like, why this weight? Why how many sets? And why this many reps? And like, you should have an answer for that stuff. Like, you should have a well thought out answer, or a rationale for everything that you're doing with people. And not everybody's going to agree with you. Like, there are different training philosophies out there, but I think that as long as you have a sound rationale for what you're doing and you can communicate that with the people you're working with, then they're going to be happy. And I think a lot of people in our field, unfortunately, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are people out there that are just kind of doing things randomly, you know what I mean? Or doing things because they saw it on, social media or whatever, and then they're just going to try and like do it with their client without like the rationale behind it. And I think that obviously that's going to lead to, impaired progress, potential for injury, things like that, that is unnecessary.
Yeah, I think when I'm writing programs now, and even like with the gym, like I said, part of it was like, trying to consolidate a little bit. Like as I kind of get more advanced, especially in powerlifting, I'm always thinking like more of like, can I pull stuff out? Like what's like really like needed? And I think
Yes,
as you get older, we're getting close to like that masters category.
for sure. I
Else.
turned 40 in November, so it's done deal for me.
So I think like kind of, putting in more of a premium, like, and again, I think like, there's like kind of this idea of like progressive overload, but also like, the idea of like minimum effective dose. And I know it's like it's not like sexy to say like, I'm just going to do like the minimum amount of work.
Right.
Especially, like New York people, like we're always like, you got to hustle, you got to grind, you can't sleep, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, that's kind of like
Yes.
the culture we like kind of grew up in. But I think for long-term development,
Hmm.
can you like get away with the smallest increase? And that's something where I did want to kind of jump into maybe some of your experience with starting strength and stuff, because I know you taught a lot of courses there, and I think there's a lot of great fundamental principles, and sometimes like we kind of talked about where good, bad, or indifferent. Sometimes some of these figures like Mark Ripito and stuff, they can be very polarizing and very but understanding what's like take whatever you think of the person aside. Can we get the principles and understand like
Right.
okay, what's like kind of going on behind the method? So like if you could add 5 pounds of workout, and just like
Mhm.
why wouldn't you just like take a simple approach? So I think
Right.
that's where you kind of mentioned like just like your basic periodization, like a linear model. Like you can it's going to have to get more complicated at some point, so we don't necessarily have to like let's not.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to if that's like enough kind of a jumping off point as far as like I guess some maybe things that you could highlight for maybe that aren't familiar with the system. And I also think too like some people kind of think like when you start to get into more the advanced intermediate programs and stuff, like they think like these are like templates, and it's really
Mhm.
like just understanding the principles of like transitioning from I guess a novice progression to like it can look different for other people. So I think that's where people
Sure.
mess up too. But anyways, you could just maybe touch on like maybe your kind of experiences with that like kind of training system, and maybe some I guess takeaways that people, whether they like are going to do like that program to it
Yeah.
not, like because I think there's a lot of great principles that people can like learn from with that.
Sure. So, one thing I just to add to what you said, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of like you said, as we get older and, we have more demands on our time, you're managing multiple businesses, family life, job stresses, things like that. It really forces you to take a look at your programming and say, like, what do I absolutely need to be doing in order to make progress? And what stuff that I'm doing just because maybe I like to do it, or you know what I mean? Like, how much is it really helping me? And certainly like for me, after my son was born, it really made me look at like what I was doing and like pare it down to the minimum amount that I could do and still make progress and still feel like I'm training and that sort of thing. And you know, And it was done really out of necessity, just because, your time constraints get in the way. You don't have the time to train like when we were younger. And it might be even for the better at a certain point when recovery starts to get a little bit tougher and things like that. So I think sometimes when we're working with people, we have to take that into account as well. Like, what is their family life like? What is their job stress like? Are they sleeping? Are they eating well? Like, how much can they really tolerate with like the program we're making for them? But then, just to kind of go back to the starting strength stuff. So I am a starting strength coach. I've worked, I've been a coach with them since 2012. And the thing that first appealed to me about starting strength when I read the books, was one, like we said, you should have a rationale for what you're doing. It was really the most detailed explanation for like how to perform the lifts out of anything that I had read previously. And I was really impressed with that. And from a programming standpoint, basically the way that starting strength is set up, the program that, like, if you went onto the internet and Googled starting strength, it's the what Mark Ripito refers to as his novice linear progression. So it's a beginner program, right? It's a beginner strength training program for somebody that's interested in learning how to lift weights. And it's a full body, 3 day per week program where you're basically going to do a squat, a pressing movement, and a pulling movement at each session. And the purpose of it is to get as strong as you can, as quickly as you can, by adding a little bit of weight every session for however long you can. Now, for some people, that'll be, several months. For some people, maybe it'll be a little bit longer. It just depends on the person, depends on their previous level of fitness, their recovery ability, age, injury status, lots of different things. But I would say most people can usually run that program for about 3 months or so, and make pretty continuous gains in strength. And it's a very simple approach, right? It doesn't require any real advanced programming. And I think that people kind of sometimes misconstrue it because it's not meant to be for an advanced lifter. Obviously, if you've been training for a long time, your ability to go up and weight every session, that's gone. You know what I mean? Like that's you're going to have more advanced programming in order to really plan out, your smaller incremental increases over time, right? I mean, if you've been training for a while, you might be lucky to put on 15 pounds on your lift in an entire training cycle, like we were just talking about with your strict curl preparation, right? And which is great progress. Whereas if you're first starting out, you can put 15 pounds on your lift in a week. You know what I mean? Like it's so you're just at a different level of adaptation to the training stress. And then basically the programming shifts to where you're making weekly progress. So this is kind of like a more intermediate type of program where you're starting to manipulate volume and intensity, kind of like periodization, but you're just doing it in 1 week increments as opposed to planning it out for a longer period of time. And then you try and, again, different templates are out there, and there are different ways that you can go about it. And then once you kind of I should say, like, stall out on that, where your ability to make progress weekly diminishes, then you have to get into more of like the advanced programming, right? Where you're getting into periodization, whether that's linear or block or all these different, things that are out there. And, um, I think there are a lot of people that, one, either they're beginners and they just want to jump to the advanced stuff because they think that that's really like how to make progress, right? They see like this is what advanced lifters are doing, so I should be doing that. When in reality, advanced lifters are doing that to try and continue to milk, less progress for as long as they can. Whereas if you're just starting out, you should, make those fast gains while you have the ability to, and build up your base of strength. Rather than like artificially slow your progress down with much more advanced programming. And then like I said, I think there are other people that, maybe they've been training for a while and they're already pretty strong and they see this program starting strength on the internet and then they try and run it where they're going up in weight every single session and it doesn't work for them and they're pissed off, you know what I mean? And they're like, oh, this thing sucks. So I think a lot of times it's like misapplication of the principles. But like you said, I think if you look at it kind of objectively and you take, like you said, Rip sometimes is a controversial figure and people feel strongly about him one way or the other. Um, take that aside and you look at the material, basically it's a layout of how you can perform the basic lifts, right? And it's a template for how you can progress through the initial stages of your training, right? From beginner to more advanced. And then once you get to more advanced, I mean, then you can get into all different types of stuff like, the West Side style of training. And, there's so many different things out there. But I would say you want to build a good base of strength first before you get into, the more advanced programming models that are out there.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that like I've kind of I guess learned and got from some of those systems is just like if you could make like this a small tweak versus like okay, I'm just scrapping like the whole program because I think people like I'm gonna do 5-3-1, I'm gonna do Juggernaut, I'm gonna do people. I don't know if people like remember these programs, but
Right.
like
Oh, yeah. That's
like I'm trying to think of like now it's like because now it's so like common to have like they said this, your snow. I call it the snowflake program, but you know,
hmm
everyone needs their like really specific. So I think that that's another thing too. I think like when you're in the beginning, like a very general template, like you said, is totally fine
hmm
because it's not like made for you. Doesn't mean it's like not going to work like either.
Right.
But as you kind of continue increase your own development and you kind of like start to stall a little bit more as you get older, and like kind of you mentioned before about like strict curl thing too. I think part of it was like obviously like it was a new lift, so like it was kind
Right.
of like I kind of
So you're
started.
not as adapted to it like you would be for the squat or the deadlift or the bench.
Yeah, so like kind of just going off that, like so, for me to like add like 10 pounds to my squat at this point, it's like it's like a struggle, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last year I hit and I ended up kind of like hurting myself, so it was stupid, but whatever, it is what it is. But I hit like a 701. It was like point, whatever. It was like it was like a 1 pound like all
Right.
time deadlift PR, and I was like
Yeah.
I was stoked because
Yeah, of course.
I haven't hit like over a 700-pound deadlift since I was much heavier. So
Right.
it sounds like oh you only added 1 pound, but it's like well I was lighter, it's
Yeah.
all the stuff, and it's like and it like moved good. So it's just one of those things where it's like it doesn't sound like, but it's like it took like so like long even just to like
Right.
be in a position to even like attempt that,
Yeah,
where
of course.
with the strict curl, I'm still like, not like as neurologically efficient, even just at the movement pattern. So like, now like my technique's a little bit more stable. I probably, it'll probably, hopefully not too much, but stall a little bit more. And, I won't see as much progress, but now it's like, at least, I have a good like foundation and I kind of have an idea of, kind of where to go with that. And then I'll
Mhm.
probably have to make more like adjustments, like kind of moving forward,
Yeah.
as I continue that like journey. But, yeah, I think like just, if it's something like adding 5 pounds or adding another set or, like it doesn't need to be like overly kind of complicated, especially like in the beginning.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just want to kind of get your kind of opinion on, or I don't know if you thought about this or whatever. So one of the things that like, Eddie Cohen has talked about and something I was even chatting about with him or whatever. So like, and this is more applies to like guys our age or people that have been in it for like a little bit longer. Maybe they've been
Mhm.
training for over a decade. Like as you kind of go through like your lifetime, he said you end up kind of training like how you used to train. Like, so I kind of brought up with this more like West Side style system. I've kind of gone through different iterations. I've tried a bunch of
Mhm.
stuff. Um, and like for me, I know like having like using accommodating resistance and a little bit more variety,
Mhm.
a little bit more, of a not an emphasis, but just making sure I include some isolation and accessory work in
Yeah.
where some people just don't care to do that.
Uh-huh.
Also, like the programming at some point does need to like fit like your personality type
For
too.
sure.
Whereas maybe some guys, I don't know if you see this, like they really want like they want to know exactly. They're very like analytical. They might like want to
Mhm.
know like what they're doing like well in advance, like the exact percentage, the exact set of
Yes.
reps. and other people could be a little bit more flexible. They could use like an RPE or reps in reserve.
Right.
You've kind of found like certain personality types or certain clients like kind of maybe lend themselves more to a certain style, or like what are your kind of thoughts like?
For sure. And you know, I think that's where it's important to, you know, be well versed in different programming styles, right? To meet the needs of the people that you're working with. But I do want to also say that, you know, your point about making small changes to your program is super important. And that was a huge mistake that I used to make with myself, right? And I think everybody has done this where it's like, you have a bad workout in the gym and you say, "Oh, my program's not working anymore." You know, I gotta change everything. Where really the best approach is to stay consistent, make small changes as you need to, whether that's like you said, to, you know, adding or taking away sets or tweaking an exercise, or, you know, I always tell my clients now, it's like we want to make one change at a time so that we can actually evaluate how you respond to it, right? If you're changing multiple things at once all the time, you don't, if you're it's working, that's great, but you don't know exactly why it's working, and if it's not working, you don't know why either, you know. So I think that that's super important. And you know, to your point about people having different personality types, I mean, for sure, you know, you get some people that you work with that like they want to know every little detail, and they want, you know, a layout of what you're doing and where you're going with this. And other people are just much more laid back and can, and they don't actually, it's like information overload for them. If you try and give them that stuff, they don't want to hear it, you know. So you have to kind of get to know the personality of the people that you're working with, and, you know, determine what's going to work best for that individual.
So I just want to kind of make sure I touch on this because we've been talking a lot about like the training side, which is great.
Sure.
Um, so I want to just kind of, and then if you have like a heart and out at some, if you got to like cut out at some point, just let me know if we get
No,
to.
I'm good.
I could always talk to you for, for a long time. Uh, so one of the next, I want to kind of transition more of to like, okay, we talked about like more of the training stuff, the X's and
Sure.
O's. So obviously like physical therapy is a big part of like what you do. That's, you
Mhm.
know, and all that stuff. So um, I guess there's kind of two main areas I want to kind of touch on, so you can kind of decide which way you want to go first. So like number
Sure.
one, I think, and it's again, it depends on like who you follow and stuff. I try to pay attention to the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe it's died down a little bit, but I know like there's a couple of things. There's like, you know, corrective exercise for trainers. Now I think it's, and again, I don't know like if it's fizzling out or whatever. There's like a whole, and I don't know if you follow these people or not, because it's like so like far out of like how we train and stuff. But
Mhm.
there's a big push for like there's like movement people like Animal Flow and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't mean to like call out certain names, just so you understand what I'm talking. You know, you have your FRC and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Your functional range conditioning, and then there's
Yeah.
like Goda, and like there's all these different. And it's like, you know, there's some people that like tend to, they'll even go as far as not even to say this is like how you should train. They might even like attack and be like, you should never squat.
Yeah.
You should
Right.
never. And I
Yeah.
think when you start to get into absolutes, that's where I kind of like raise an eyebrow a little bit, because I think that we
Right.
can incorporate tools like, you know, I do like certain things. I take some things from my, if it's warranted, uh like a bird dog or whatever, or like a
Mhm.
something like if someone's having like a specific issue, you can kind of have these different tools, or maybe it's from
Sure.
different. So like some of these exercises might come from physical therapy, they might come from yoga, they might come from
Right.
um, this might be more like a Pendlay row is from,
Mhm.
it's named after an Olympic lifter, but a lot of
Right.
power lifters. Just like one example that kind of comes to mind. But
Yeah.
can be take, you know, so anyways, that's like kind of the jumping off point. Whereas like um trainers that play physical therapists, and also like these kind of different systems that really kind of like demonize spinal loading, barbell lifts,
Yeah.
you know, because I think that could be very confusing too, because not everyone wants to be a power lifter. But again, I think we both can, we tend to have a bias where like if you just get generally strong,
Right.
that's going to probably help all your other qualities, regardless if you want to compete as a power lifter or not. So that's kind of like our
Yeah.
bias maybe, but you know, I think it's anyway. So yeah, we can kind of start the conversation.
No, I agree. And that is something, you know, certainly, you know, I personally enjoy training with barbells. I think they're a very efficient way to get strong, right? So I try and incorporate them with a lot of the people that I work with. And there is this kind of conceived notion that, well, I don't want to be a power lifter, like I don't need to do this stuff. And it's like, well, we're, like you said, we're using these exercises to get generally strong. Now, listen, I would never force somebody to do something that they just don't want to do. If you would rather leg press than squat, and whatever, that's fine. Well, I'll work with you in whatever capacity you're willing to work. But uh I do think that the barbell exercises are a great way to get generally strong and be able to apply it to everyday life and athletics and things, well outside of powerlifting. But, from a rehabilitative standpoint, if we're talking about physical therapy, like you said, there are a lot of, you know, and again, to me, so much of this goes back to social media, and like there's just so much information out there. And I think you brought up a great point, though. Anybody that's talking in like absolutes is somebody to be wary of, whether they're saying you should always do this or you should never do this. There's just too much gray area in what we do that there are very few instances where I think that you should be talking to people in absolutes. And it's something like, as a PT, I have to overcome a lot of times, because they'll have their doctor will say, oh, my doctor said I should never, do squats, or I should never do deadlifts, or I should never, lift anything up over my head again. And it's like, well, just think about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just a ridiculous statement. Um, so I think that we have to be careful with like the language that we use with people. And one of the things that, when I became interested in physical therapy, um, I was working as a trainer and I loved it. I enjoyed what I was doing a lot. And I just was kind of curious, like, about PT, like, what is it that they know that I don't know? You know what I mean? Like, I was curious to like learn more about the body and rehab, and like, I wanted to be able to like work with people through, from a fitness standpoint, strength and conditioning, but also be able to rehab them if they had injuries and stuff like that. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in it. And, as I got into PT, and certainly there was a lot of things that I learned in school that very helpful and great information, but there are so many similarities, right, between, training for fitness and rehab. And it really is just about the scale. It's about finding the appropriate starting point, right? Knowing what the limitations are for that person, and finding the appropriate starting point and gradually building them up from there. So if you have a fitness client, they probably have a higher starting point, right, because they don't have an injury that they're working around or whatever the case is. And you might be able to progress them a little bit faster or more easily. But PT is really not that much different, in my opinion. It's about finding the appropriate starting point for the person and being able to progress them and make the adjustments as necessary, as they come up. And, like you said, there are a lot of different schools of thought out there. And I would say the best thing is to be generally knowledgeable about as much of it as you can. And then you can take some stuff that you think is valuable and not get too, don't get too aligned with any one methodology, because then you're going to be kind of shutting yourself off from other things out there that could potentially be helpful. So,
Yeah, I think if for the trainers out there that are listening to this, but also athletes too, I think it's good to like think about like all these different modalities, like your powerlifting, your weightlifting, your plyometrics, your maybe yoga, whatever, different tools on the tool belt. And, like generally, like I think, you know, we're a little bit biased, but like your basic barbell lifts are going to accomplish a lot of different tasks. They can kind of, solve a lot of problems. By manipulating the load, the speed, the range of motion, they're going to be appropriate. That's why like this podcast is called Powerlifting for the People. Most people can do some sort of variation, some sort of range of motion on a squat, a press, and a pull. It's just,
right.
whereas like not everyone, it's going to be much harder to get someone to do a snatch. It's going to be much harder to have someone like, and again, not to like say our like strength sports better, whatever. But one of the things I love about like powerlifting, now I'm getting into strict curl, you could like choose the load that you're doing.
Mhm.
Whereas something like strongman, it's like, here's this 400-pound log. You got to
Right.
if you could do it or you can't. So like having that ability to scale, I think is important. And then kind of going back to I think the ability to scale back and scale
Mhm.
forward, progress and regress is important. And that's one of the things that I kind of and maybe you could, so this will kind of lead into my next question. So like a lot of these other kind of like more whether it be calisthenics or like kind of more movement based systems, one of the things that I kind of trying to like reconcile is like there's it's really outside of maybe just range of motion. Like it's hard to measure progress. It's hard to like progressively load it.
Right.
So I don't know if you're trying to do an exercise, and again, you probably have more. So let's say someone like has a shoulder injury, or whatever. You
Mhm.
may you one of the goals may be to restore more external rotation or internal, whatever it is at the shoulder, at the hip.
Mhm.
Maybe if there's a knee injury or a knee surgery or a hip surgery, you want to restore flexion and extension, and those are maybe things that you actually are going to be measured, right? But how do you're going to probably use some sort of extra, whether you're increasing repetitions, increasing range of motion. Some of these kind of movements I kind of see, it's kind of like they look really great for the video. But what's kind of the practicality and like, and then you see like, so I guess like when you're kind of analyzing, you're trying to kind of filter through this stuff. What are some things that you look for to make sure like this is kind of I guess an efficacious way or an efficient way to actually kind of increase my range of motion or increase.
Right.
Should you be trying to, because that's the other thing, should a trainer be trying to, that's like something I kind of like should, because again, your scope is going to be different than my scope. So like for me personally, I'll kind of tell you, and you can, for me, like as a strength coach or as a personal trainer, I'm going to be kind of focusing on, getting the athlete stronger in some sort of measurable way, like 99%
Right.
of the time. And I like to think about if I'm doing a movement preparation drill or something, the way I kind of think about it, if I'm doing like, a hip flexor stretch or whatever, I think it's more, I like to view it more as a neurological thing where they're accessing what they already have and maybe they're
Right.
sort of, as opposed to there's other things like, again, not to like knees over toes and stuff where like, okay, I'm trying to like get more range. And I don't know if that's always a good thing just from like, that's just like kind of something I'm trying to come to terms with. So I don't know like what your thoughts are with trainers trying to, increase the range of motion at certain joints.
Yeah.
Where does the scope, where do you kind of draw the line as far as what a physical therapist should do versus a trainer? Because that's something that I try to like, kind of like stay in my lane
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And I think it's getting more and more popular to like, do long length partials, do more range of motion,
Yeah.
full range of motion. And so those are some of the things that I'm kind of seeing where I could see like newer trainers kind of fall into the trap of like really pushing, range of motion and then potentially maybe like having a client go into a range that maybe they're not capable of yet or
Yeah. So a couple of things, and you brought up some great points. One, in terms of like exercise selection and things like that, like you said, one of the things that I think there's a big misconception about with the barbell lifts in particular is like, oh, they're dangerous, you're going to hurt yourself. They're incredibly scalable. You can incrementally load them to really minute degrees, right? In our gym we have half-kilo plates. We have we have the quarter-kilo plates. That so you can make a half kilo, 1.1 pound jump on a lift if you want to, and you are in control of the forces, the movement patterns, where you can't say that about a lot of other activities, and um, you think about like doctors never tell parents like, oh, your kid should be careful playing soccer. There are a lot of uncontrolled forces in soccer, but if you tell them that you're gonna have your kid lift weights, they're like, oh my God, like what are you trying to kill them? And really, if you think about which one is more dangerous and which one has higher injury rates, it's soccer. You know what I mean? But that's a whole other tangent that we could go on. But and like you said, a lot of these other systems, and it's not to, and again, like we're biased because this is what we do and this is what we're into. But to me, there are so many other things out there that are just not incrementally loadable. So it's like, how do you progress them? What do you do over time to like increase the stress that you're applying to the person? So the barbell exercises fit so many different categories, not just from a performance standpoint, but also from a rehab standpoint. Like I'll start people with like, after they've had a back injury, a partial range of motion rack pull, and then we work them back down to the floor, and they're increasing their capacity over time. They're getting stronger, their range of motion's improving, right? Their tolerance to load is improving. You can modify the exercises in so many different ways. So I do think that they really work well from a rehab standpoint, not just a performance standpoint. And, from a, the trainer thing, and, I have been a personal trainer. I still train people. So I know that it can be a little bit frustrating. And like one of my early experiences, and one of the things that made me interested in learning more about physical therapy is one of my clients that I was training, who I actually still train to this day. She was one of my very first clients. I've been working with her for years now. And I had her in the gym. She had been in a car accident, and she was going to the physical therapy office that was in the Equinox that I was working in, right? And she was going for neck pain. I was having her do some like shoulder presses with dumbbells, like light, not anything heavy. She had no problem with it. PT saw me doing it and was like, "What are you doing?" Like he was like super pissed about it, right? And I was like, what is this guy's problem? Like I don't understand. And it left a bad taste in my mouth. I was really annoyed about it. And it I think sometimes you know we can be a little bit like territorial, you know what I mean? Like it's like, well, this is what a PT should be doing versus a personal trainer. I do think that there are some things that probably personal trainers shouldn't be doing, like joint mobilizations. And I think when you get into like a lot of the manual therapy and hands-on stuff, like when I was a personal trainer before I went to PT school, I would stretch my clients. I would do like a little hamstring stretch and, stuff like that with them. And if they wanted me to, I'd have no problem doing that. But I wasn't doing like spinal manipulations and like massage and stuff like that. And that was stuff that I learned how to do in PT school, where I really didn't get that before. Um, so I think that that's where it kind of gets into a little bit of a gray area. And if you're a personal trainer, I know that there are some certifications out there that like you can call yourself a therapist, like a certified like stretch therapist. That could be a little bit misleading to people. But from an exercise standpoint, I would just say like a good rule of thumb, and this is the same for whether you're a physical therapist or a personal trainer, you shouldn't be doing stuff with people that you're not comfortable with. You know what I mean? Like, and if you don't feel confident in like doing this with the person, or the person is expressing to you like, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this, you should not be pushing them, to like do something that they don't feel ready for, because it's like, I mean, we walk a fine line, and some people do need to be pushed, but if like they're adamant, like, hey, like I don't want to be doing this, or like that hurts, like if you're, pushing them into a certain position or stretching them or whatever, it's like you should take that feedback from them, because it's not worth causing an injury or making something worse, you know, for the client, and then for you from a personal standpoint, a liability standpoint.
Awesome. So a couple of things I just want to like kind of recap, and then I think it's been on, I think, for like over an hour. So I think it's out. So be mindful of your time, but I appreciate it. I think a lot of good nuggets. So I think having like the book smarts, the knowledge, the basic understanding, anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, all those different things, and then combined with the practical application is going to be really important. Whether you're an athlete or a coach, just kind of understanding like why you're doing things, making those small changes over time as we get older, potentially kind of, I say addition by subtraction,
Yeah.
what you actually need to kind of keep moving the needle, and then kind of evaluate, do I really need to do this? Uh,
Right.
Training kind of based on your preference, personality, but also like having some principles that you're kind of adhering to is, and then also just whatever you do, it's got to be kind of measurable, scalable. You have to have the ability to progressively like increase the stress over time. So I think those are just some kind of big takeaways, I think, for people. And if you're not able to do those things, you may need to reevaluate your kind of training method, or maybe, seek some more guidance. So, um, where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Well, first I would just say that that's an excellent recap, and I agree with everything you said. So we're on the same page for sure. So, like I said, my full-time job's at Adelphi University. So, but I do some private stuff through my wife's business, which is Progressive Rehab and Strength. So she has a website, progressiverehabandstrength.com. She's also a physical therapist and a strength coach and a much better power lifter than I am. And which John can attest to. And then I do see people in person still at Excel PT and Workout, which is located in Manhasset in Nassau County.
Awesome. We'll definitely give John a follow and check his stuff out. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys found this helpful, please give the podcast a 5-star review. Please share it with a friend. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.